Hey there, hope you're doing well. This is podcast number 4 in this series, API Gateway series. The last three, I give you a lot of introduction, the requirements, give you context to the problem, talked about different tools and clients, and we've discussed at length about some of the features that the gateway is going to bring to the table in the last podcast. If not, please check it out. I think we talked about a good set of features that the gateway supports, that our gateway is going to support, like our implementation. Certainly not all of it, not by any stretch of the imagination, but hopefully it gave you a sense of what the essence of that middle tier is. Now let's keep going, right? Now this API, the gateway code on AWS it has its own responsibility, serves as our middleman, and it entertains requests coming from clients and third parties, makes a lot of decisions, routes it to our backend servers, gets a response, massages it using a number of processes at different tiers, and then sends a response back to the client, right? So that's trivializing what I explained in fair detail in the last video. Now let's keep going. So now you implemented that. We chose AWS. You could have chosen anything else. There's a lot of systems that you could have picked. Now once it's published, how do you, let's say you create the API and all of it is working. Now we go to Postman, I make the request, it goes to the API, and then the whole thing seems to work. I sign up and whatnot, right? Let's get into the specifics of what that actually means. Let's talk about multi-tenancy as a starting point in this particular video, right? Now, when somebody signs into your system, right? Okay, they say, okay, great, this company seems to have an API that serves their own systems. It's been working pretty well. We love their UI. Go to snowpal.com. We download the mobile app. We want to actually consume their endpoints. Awesome. Now you start consuming the endpoint. Let's call it, let's say it's Oracle is a large company. Let's say they take a liking to our endpoints and start consuming our endpoints, right? They're going to be like, hey, I need my data to live in my own space. What if, they are a tenant? The next tenant could be Apple for all we know, and we hope. So there's going to be multiple tenants consuming our API, and they could require, if it's a really large company, the needs would be very specific and different. But what I'm trying to tell you here is, there will be companies of varying sizes that are going to consume the API, and some of them could say, hey, I don't care if my data coexists and lives with other tenants out there. That's fine. Some other clients would say, hey, I want my data to live separately, right? So you need to provision a separate database for us. A third client, much larger, slightly different need, could say, hey, not only does my data need to live separately, I need to actually, you need to provision different servers, so I'm not competing for resources from a computing standpoint with other clients of yours, right? And maybe there's a fourth one that says, I'm okay if my data coexists, but maybe my servers have to be different, right? It's almost like, a la carte, right? You're picking and choosing what combination you need. Now, are we going to support in our first release, all the clients being able to pick and choose each of these? Absolutely not, right? So it's going to be coming in the future releases of our API versions, but that's the idea. So our core architecture needs to support it, and it does, right? So I've mentioned 6 or 7 features in the last video, that the core features of the API gateway. Add one more to it, right? This is it. It basically supports the fact that the client wants an exclusive database to separate their data from a tenancy standpoint, or they want separate systems basically up and running, right? There's a lot more involved there from an infrastructural standpoint. Now, some of it could be done manually as we're growing as a company, but there could come a point where we cannot do this manually, so we're going to have to kind of make it part of the system and automate a lot of this stuff, which is bound to happen, but it'll organically happen, right? So that's in terms of multi-tenancy and how you want to keep your data separation. And if you don't want to keep your data separation, how do you even actually facilitate that, right? Because if I sign up as Krish into one of the systems as user tenant A, and I actually end up using a different system, a different business out there who also end up using Snowpal, but they actually coexist in the same space and they did not want the data separation, Krish should be able to sign up because I'm going to use my same email address, right? You cannot say user already exists. That doesn't make any sense because it's a completely different system. So you can imagine the types of challenges we would run into to be able to facilitate that. Now, you want to know exactly how to do. It's beyond the scope of these videos. Feel free to hit me up, and I am one of those people who doesn't hold a lot of knowledge close to our heart. I'd like to give back in every little way possible. So I'm happy to share more details with you if that's going to interest you or benefit you in whatever it is that you're building from an engineering standpoint, right? So that's some part of the deployment challenges that we do have. So let's say the API, the gateway deals with more of that kind of stuff as well. Now, if you take it further, initially our gateway is going to be talking to an API server, get response back and deal with it in isolation, make any changes or massage it and send the response back. But down the road, we're going to have we're going to have more microservices where the gateway would actually receive responses from those microservices, and it would have more intelligence built into the gateway through, again, a different set of lambdas, different SAM apps, different functions, whatever, right? But I'm just collectively calling this the gateway because it encompasses a lot of these components, whether it's SQS, whether it's SNS, CloudWatch, CloudFormation, CloudFront. I forget these names. They become hazy because there's so many of these that we need to use, and we do use. Lambda and the API itself, layers and more stuff, right? Right now, all of the business intelligence is built into the API, core API systems, but you can see it's going to be only a matter of time where the gateway would end up having to do more than proxying and massaging. That's generic, maybe doing some more specific stuff, because maybe there's a client that needs a slight set of changes to the JSON responses, right? Now we could say, hey, go consume the responses we have, and then you can do whatever it is you want to do with them, which should be good enough an answer. But if you're big enough a client and if you make a compelling case, we would actually encourage, right? We're not going to say no. We're going to do everything we can to help you to build that, right? So you want slightly different data. The data structure needs to change because you need responses from multiple endpoints, maybe within the same API or maybe across APIs, right? So imagine endpoint responses coming from within a single API versus coming from across APIs, and then the gateway actually doing something with those responses collectively and sending it back to you. That can get as complex as you want. This is probably not up to our 3.0 release or further out, right? But that's also, the architecture should inherently, even if it doesn't support it, meaning you can't, you have to make some tweaks and alterations, we shouldn't have to rebuild it, right? Rebuild what we're doing. Sure, we can't over-engineer and solve world hunger. We need to first appease the hunger of 2 people before we go to the 3rd and the 5th. At the same time, you don't want to be myopic and only build something can appease 2 people's appetite, right? Then what happens if there's a 3rd hungry person? You can't redo what you're doing. So there's a fine balance. The more you do this, the more gray hairs you get, I guess. Maybe you can hope that the more better decisions you might end up making, right? That's more intelligence being built into this gateway, and the gateway can get as complex as you want. Now then begs the question, does everything, when I say gateway, do all of them have to live on AWS? Like I told you earlier, not exactly, and we don't prefer that. We're completely against vendor lock-ins or even language lock-ins or framework lock-ins, which is why Snowpal today uses a number of different languages, frameworks, systems, and whatnot. Does it make our life more challenging than sometimes it needs to be? Absolutely. But also give us the peace to sleep well that, hey, that we are not dependent, or our system's not dependent on one vendor out there. And if hell breaks loose, we are easily able to port pieces and parts of what we're doing to other vendors with little sweat. I wouldn't say no sweat, but with little sweat, right? That's the idea essentially. So we've talked a lot more about the gateway, gotten more in depth. This is video number 4. Video number 5, let's digress a little bit, take a detour and talk about some API hubs and platforms that are out there that you could possibly leverage to publishing your API and start monetizing, because it's 4 videos in, we haven't talked about monetizing, right? Ultimately, that is the end goal, right? You want to benefit from what you're doing. You want other business to benefit, but you also want to benefit and grow as a business. So in video number 5, we will talk about API monetization. Thank you. Talk to you soon.